In an emergency situation, the absolute worst thing that can happen is everyone pull out a cell phone and start going. So, as an example, in
Interesting.
2018 in Florida, there was a school shooting. So, all the kids pull out their phones, start going. So, the first thing that happens is the cell network now dies. So, all the emergency, they cannot communicate with each other because the
Oh,
network is so clogged with in and out texting. The next thing is everyone is posting very different information. Where am I hiding? Where are the different gunmen? But to make matters worse, as soon as the parents are getting texts from their kids, something is happening at my school, what do the parents do? Get in the car, drive to school. All of a sudden, there's a line of cars of parents trying to get into the parking lot. The ambulances couldn't get in. Kids
oh,
literally died because the ambulances were blocked by parents trying to rush the scene to help their kids. So the idea that it somehow makes kids safer, no, we have data showing that having cell phones in an emergency makes kids less safe. Let the adults run the show and we're going to sort this thing out. So it makes you feel safer, but it actually makes things a lot less safe.
welcome to today's episode of Better Student Leaders. Today I'm joined by Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath. Jared's done some pretty amazing things. Hey Jared, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
Good, good. Let me tell the audience about you so they're interested and they're excited. And most importantly, today is a very big day. We're 3 days in the future from when we're recording. Your book is being released today.
Big release day, that's exciting. And this is not an Aussie accent, so I'm going to be coming with some Americanisms today. Your audience will love it.
They're going to love it, right? Jared, you're a neuroscientist, you're an educator, you've written multiple books. One of the things that I think is really interesting about what you've done, you've given your TED Talk, which I highly recommend people jump on and listen to. You've written a book, which I'll let you tell the audience all about, called The Digital Delusion: How Classroom Technology Harms Our Kids' Learning. So I just want to say that again. The Digital Delusion: How Classroom Technology Harms Our Kids' Learning and How to Help Them Thrive Again. I love in this book, thank you so much for sending an early copy. I read it cover to cover in an afternoon. I just could not put it down. And a couple of things that I wanted to shout out without giving too much away. Just, I want to read two sentences just from the prologue. The
Yeah.
second sentence of the entire book is, our children are less cognitively capable than we were at their age. So right now, if you're listening and you've got kids, or you're a student who's come out of school, our children are less cognitively capable than we were at their age. Wow. Second line I want to highlight: Gen Z is less healthy, less happy, and less knowledgeable than their parents. You'd forgive an audience if they picked up that book as a parent or a Gen Zer and went, oh my goodness, what have we done wrong? So, Jared, you got to tell me, mate, what have we done wrong?
Oh my gosh. If we take a look at the broad spectrum of things, there's a lot of stuff going on. And there's some incredible researchers doing incredible work with, if you look at like John Haidt talking about social media and cell phones, if you look at Abigail Schreier over here, who's talking about the over medicalization of childhood, how
Her books are
basically,
incredible.
this is one of my favorite things is if you're a kid listening to this and a parent, talk about this. When we went to school, guess how many parents dropped their kids off at our school? Good news, you can count it on no hands because the answer was zero. We took school buses or we rode the bike. Every single school I work at today, if you get there at drop off or pickup time, there's a line of cars about a mile long dropping everyone off. And that was one of the things that Schreier would say is we're overprotecting, over medicalizing childhood, thinking everything is going to be dangerous unless we do it for them and with them. So you've got Lukianoff is making arguments about lack of resilience, all this stuff. My big argument is to come in now and say, okay, well, that stuff might explain the happiness, that might explain the health. But what about the cognitive stuff? Why learning? Why are kids today learning less than ever before, even though we're surrounded by more information than we ever have been? And the only culprit that keeps coming up again and again is digital technology in schools, is EdTech. So we were promised for what, decades now, that if you bring tech into schools, kids are going to learn more, be more creative. And as soon as that started to fail and the data started coming in real early that it wasn't working, we started blaming the kids and the teachers and the parents. You're not using it right. You got to use it better. Do more tech and you'll get even more creativity. And it's just been going down. So this book is my attempt to try and suss out what's going on with tech and why is it harming learning as deeply as it is.
You said something that's really important, that when it started going down, take me back to what was happening in the 20th century and the trends in IQ and educational attainment, because it's not like it's
Yeah.
just been a decline since the birth of man. We've been getting, it was going good for a while.
Oh gosh, especially in the West, we have every single generation has improved on their parents on every measure that we have of cognition and on health and on happiness, believe it or not, across the West. So, starting most of the cognitive tests really started late 1909 into 1910. In the teens, you started getting IQ. And what we saw is every generation did better. And so just take something like IQ. A lot of people think intelligence is inborn. You're born with what you got, off you go. No, every generation scored 6 points higher on IQ than their parents. And that was every generation throughout the 20th century. So to the point where if you took an average teenager from 1990 and compared them to an average teenager from 1910, the kid from 1910 would have an IQ around 65. That we would claim is mentally decrepit. But no, that we watched it happen. Everyone was improving. And then people started to go, why? What's going on? Especially with the cognitive stuff. It was school. That you can almost draw a straight line. The amount of time each generation spent in school increased. And as it did, so too did their intelligence. So too did their creativity. So too did their critical thinking abilities. So we naturally assume, cool, more time in school, more, that's your linchpin. And then right around 2002, everything flipped. And then everything started going down. Even though kids were spending more time in schools, now intelligence, memory, attention, all these things started to go down. And so we got to figure out what the heck changed in 2002 that has continued to this point that just keeps driving things lower and lower, to the point where now an average teenager today, and apologies, would be equivalent to an average teenager from 1970. Whether that's good or bad, who knows, take that or leave that, but we're not going in the right direction, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And Jared, you are the perfect person to comment on this. You have a master's degree in mind, brain, and education from Harvard University. You have a doctorate from the University of Melbourne in cognitive neuroscience. It's fair to say you're a man who's pretty interested in the brain and its potential. There's some really uplifting messaging in there of we're getting brighter and our brains are able to solve problems better and better generation by generation throughout the 1900s. And nutrition is getting better and we're understanding the causes of things and things are getting better and the world is opening up. But now, and you write about this in your book so eloquently, things are going down. We're starting to wonder why. And we're sold a bill of goods. You call them, I think, 5 big myths in the book
Yeah.
that you argue are not quite accurate, that education is broken, that we need this independent learning, that we have these intelligent tutors, and if we just get technology and the newest version of ChatGPT to help us with our math problem, then wouldn't that be wonderful for everyone?
Yeah.
Can you talk us a little bit about some of these myths as to where the problem comes from and why those myths do not explain the decline that we're seeing?
Yeah, so it's most of those myths come from the tech industry itself. They were beliefs about learning. They were beliefs about human development that sound really good on paper. Give a kids a computer and let them go, and they will learn whatever they want. Learners know best for learning. Then they know more what's going to work better for them than what a teacher would. So let the learner guide the learning process. These are all things that intuitively they feel great. Man, as a parent, yeah, let my kid tell me what's what. Let me go for it. But it only takes about 2 days of being in an actual classroom till you start to realize these things don't make a ton of sense. They make sense for adults. They make sense for experts. So when you're an adult and you already know a field and somebody says, do you want to learn more about it? You go, yeah, I can handle this myself. Just give me a book. I got this. So we assume kids could do that too. Kids are nothing but mini adults. And then you realize, no, kids are a completely different species than us. They need to evolve into adulthood. They are not already adults. And the number one mechanism we had to do that, at least at a cognitive level, was always school, which if you think about it was highly structured, always has been highly based on routine, on consequences, on predictability. It was always this system that said, yeah, we're going to raise kids into adults rather than assume they're already adults and start to raise them from there. And so what you get to do is once you start to dig deeper into how humans learn, you start to pull out mechanisms. So the data, and no one can ever fight the data. Kids are unhappy today,
Doing worse
super
cognitively.
unhappy compared to us in the 90s. Kids are very far much less healthy. And by the way, an article The biggest analysis ever done was just published this morning that conclusively links screen time to obesity and heart disease. Congratulations. Surprise, said absolutely no one who's ever thought about it before, but I guess we need to do that kind of data, that research for people to say, pay attention to this stuff. But like now we can say, okay, cool, what are some of the mechanisms? And once you start diving into the mechanisms, that's where you see biology has a set of rules. If you know those set of rules, you can start to game those rules to make them work for you. And so let's just take an easy one. Relationships. One of the key markers of a relationship with another human being is what's called oxytocin. You interact with another human being live and in person, your body will release oxytocin. You will start to feel safe around them. You will start to resonate with them. Congratulations, you're building a relationship. When you interact with somebody online, the body does not release oxytocin. For some reason, our biology doesn't recognize a screen as an actual interaction. Instead, your body will start to release a chemical called tachykinins. Those are the chemical precursor to depression. So in a very real sense, our biology for 150,000 years has said, this is what it means to be happy. We throw a screen in 20 years ago, our biology couldn't catch up with it. Our biology is, I don't get it. So even though I'm looking at a person, I'm talking to a person, my body recognizes that as threatening and isolating, and I start to get depressed. So when a kid starts to feel depressed, what do? They reach out to more friends online, which is the only place they have to get them now.
Now you have a
going to make them
loop.
more depressed. So you get this nasty feedback loop where we're trying to treat the poison as the cure. You need more friends. When if you just put the phone away and had one friend live and in person, you'd start to feel different. So it's really, once you start to recognize biology and mechanisms, you start to see just how technology doesn't play very well with human biology, unfortunately.
You write in the book, you share a quote from the Karolinska Institute, and it says, there's clear scientific evidence that digital tools impair rather than enhance student learning. So if what I'm hearing you correct, if I read the book correctly for our audience, it's you've got a student sitting in front of you and we want to help them. And we think we've mistakenly been sold a bill of goods, a $400 billion EdTech industry that says if you spend more and you put the best tool in and the latest tool and kids are on the better technology, that'll make everything better. Whereas in fact, it's not just that it doesn't make it significantly better compared to all the alternatives. You talk about that in the book really compellingly, but that it actually makes it worse. Yeah. And that we believe something that's false. And that by believing that false belief, you draw the parallel, which I love, to lobotomies and where all that went wrong in germ theory and some stuff like that. We believe that you're doing a thing. Oh, surely our good intentions, we've got good hearts, but actually you put the kid on the app or on the phone or on the laptop, and now we're actually making things worse for the people we care most about. Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking that's where I like to think most of us started with the best of intentions.
Absolutely.
Tech companies, who knows? They probably just want profit. It doesn't faze me. It's what they do. But I think as teachers and parents and kids, we wanted to do best, and we were told this was best. But what Maya Angelou, do as best as you can, but when you know better, you got to
do better.
We now have decades of data showing that you put digital technology into a classroom, learning goes down. It's not compatible with anything basically we try and do. So there was a stat that I was looking up right before we started here because I wanted to double check, make sure I was right. The OECD has acknowledged that the more investment in computers and IT technology, the faster the decline in scores and performance. So it's not just there's a threshold and you're done. It seems to be the more you're pumping in. Why did I want to look up something? Because Australia was, besides New Zealand, New Zealand was the first, Australia was the second country in the world to surpass the 1-to-1 computer-to-child ratio in schools. So Australia was the second country in the world to say, we have more computers in school than students. And the graph that I was just looking at shows that guess which two countries have declined the fastest amongst the OECD when it comes to performance on international testing? New Zealand and Australia. Surprise! That's the correlation is like something like negative 0.58, where the more money you pump in, the less you're going to improve and the faster you're going to start to go down. So this is where but that's why I like the mechanisms. The data is all there. I always just giggle because the data usually means nothing. If you think about something like asbestos, We knew for about 3 decades that if you worked with asbestos, you were going to get cancer at a much higher rate than anyone else. If you played high contact sports, we knew you would get concussions and show cognitive decline much faster than if you played a non-contact sport. Data for decades means nothing. It was only when researchers came and said, let me tell you why. We now have the mechanism, the explanation why. That's when people really started to chime in. So in my book, we have a whole page or a whole chapter on data. But basically ends with that data's been around for decades. No one cares. So we better go a little bit deeper than that if we want to start changing minds and getting people really on board with this.
Absolutely. You mentioned the graphs. One of the other graphs in the book that I can't wait till it's finally out and I can screenshot it without the drafts do not share over the top of it. And I'm going to take a photo of it and send it to literally everybody I know. The PISA graphs where you looked at math, reading, and science, and it compares over 3 different years, 2012, 2015, and 2018, these declines in math scores, declines in reading scores, declines in science scores, and they decline against how much time students are using technology in schools. And then you make this really nice point that like, when you look at like the lowest of all of them is the most computer time. And when I looked at that, I thought, okay, the data, that makes sense. But you mentioned the mechanism. There was a note I wrote there about, I don't know if this technically is a mechanism, but just a really easy way for people to understand it. And I thought this just answers it so well, that students using a computer for an hour in classroom on average spend 38 minutes off task.
Yeah.
So when you say that, you go, okay, there's Jared and there's Josh. Jared's not going to get a computer. Jared's going to sit down with a problem or set of problems for an hour. Now he might look out the window and whatever, but eventually get a little bit bored. You work on the thing. Josh, we're giving a computer. And we know if we give Josh a computer for an hour, we're actually giving Josh a computer for 22 minutes. Because we know he's going to spend 38 minutes doing gosh knows what else. So now we're not comparing the power of the computer to the power of a book. We're comparing the power of an hour with a book to 22 minutes on a computer.
Yep.
And then people go, oh, so he's only really spending a third of the amount of time. You're like, exactly.
There it is. And that's why you'll see a 2-grade difference. If you take any kid from any school, high school level, and imagine you raised a kid up to 9th grade who never touched tech at school and the other one who did use tech at school, you would see a 23% differential in their abilities. That's the difference between an A and a C plus. And that's do nothing different except these kids have hard copy books. These kids do all their things on a screen. And that's that. So that it becomes a mechanism. It's the attention mechanism, right? If you want to learn something, time on task is key. And how do we measure time on task? By attentive focus. How long are you genuinely paying attention to what you're supposed to be learning? And that is absolutely massive for human beings. We will not learn what we don't pay attention to, and we will only learn what we are paying attention to. So if we're not paying attention to the right thing, we're going to be learning something totally wonky. So bring now in a computer. If for some reason you had a locked system on a computer that said you can only do one thing, like I think about if you're a surgeon and there's a machine that allows you to practice heart surgery with like haptic feedback, it feels real, looks real, you're just not going to kill anyone by using it. There's nothing else you can do on that machine. You can't check your email, you can't twiddle your friends, you can't whatever else, you go look at some video clips. It's one machine, it's one thing. So you can probably focus for an hour on there. Go to EdTech. All EdTech is internet connected devices. They're the exact same devices we use in our home. And in fact, a lot of kids take the device home with them. So now you're telling me I've got to sit down and focus for an hour and learn on a screen that I will spend 6 hours tonight multitasking on, jumping around on. Let me look at this. Let me look at that. Let me try this thing. And people are shocked that kids can't focus. And I always say, in that instance, the mechanism of attention, we set our attention to the tool we're using. And if you just gave me 2,000 hours of practice using it one way, which is the wrong way for learning, and now you sit me down and say, time to learn, don't be surprised that kids make it about 6 minutes before they start multitasking. It takes them about 6 minutes of focused study till they go, wait a second, there are a million other things I should be doing on this screen, and off they go. And that's where you get your 38 minutes per hour off task. If somehow computers only ever existed in the classroom, may have been great for attention. But the second they entered the home and the pocket, they no longer became attention tools, at least not focused attention tools, which means they're no longer valid learning tools, unfortunately.
At this point in the podcast, the big belief I think we're offering up to the audience here, and tell me if I just want to make sure I'm representing your work correctly, is that more tech in schools presented as a solution. The promise was to make things better. The data seems to indicate the exact opposite, that it makes things worse. We're starting to really understand the mechanisms of exactly how that happens. And then that leads us to some strategies and some solutions to make things better. Now, I think
Yep,
this
yep.
is the point in the narrative of the podcast where the uplifting music rises, and we say the strategies and the solutions are Height's work, Gene Twenge's work, and a bunch of other researchers is the strategies and solutions to this. Once we can break ourselves from the belief of the false belief, the false set of promises, the solutions aren't necessarily super expensive. They're not super
No.
complicated. And with all due respect to masters and PhD degrees from the best universities in the world, we don't need super advanced degrees to understand what actually needs to happen to improve things. So, in
Yep.
terms of solutions, let's go low hanging fruit. What are some of the things that Jared's School of Excellence opens tomorrow? We're stepping away from technology in the classrooms, but here
We
are some
are.
principles, some ideas, some strategies that incredible educators are going to be able to understand, and they're going to help them get better results for the students they care most about. Where do we begin?
Okay, okay. This is going to sound totally horrible, but the way I always see it, long distance, is most people, teachers are my age. What was school like in the 90s? Because that was peak school. Education hit a golden age in about 95 to about 2001. So if you can think back to what we were doing then, you've got pretty good answers. So what are some of the things we were doing then? One, you buy a printer. If you're a parent or you're a teacher, you print everything out. Oh, but kids have so many packets. Don't care. Literally, change nothing else about your teaching, change nothing else about your classroom except kids have paper versus a screen. They will learn more, comprehend better, understand more, and retain it longer than if they do the exact same stuff on a screen. So step one, buy a printer, start printing stuff out. That means we go back to textbooks. Digital textbooks were an absolute unmitigated failure. They taught kids how to search quickly through a text, but they did not teach anyone how to learn through a text. So we go back to hard copy stuff there. School wide, you then start to say, cool, let's go back to having a computer lab. So what did we have in the 90s? We had computers. They were just tucked away in a lab by the library. Why did that help us? That meant that any teacher who wanted to use tech, it had to be a very deliberate decision. It was no longer, it's there, pull it out. The easiest thing is just pull out your phone, just go for it. We got it anyway. It was cool. If I got to get my kids up and I got to reserve lab time, I better have a dang good reason why we're using that computer. And sometimes you do. Sometimes you have an absolutely brilliant reason why you need it. Cool. What we've done is we've structured it in a way where you can't just easily get it. You have to be deliberate, and in so doing, you now use it very well. You use it very deliberately. So I would say print things out, get yourself a computer lab. We can start to rethink things like homework as well,
Oh,
going
I
back to
love this statistic in the book. I love this when you're like, actually, more is not always the answer.
you start. So now we get to dive into what's working, what's not. So when it comes to homework is really interesting in that the belief is more is merrier, and it's not true. What we tend to see is the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to homework is about 60 minutes. Between 0 and 60 minutes is when you hit your biggest stride. Between 60 and 90, you get a little baby boost. But at about 90 minutes, if you're doing homework longer than 90 minutes a night, you start to learn less than kids who are doing less homework than you. To the point where if you're doing it for 3 hours, you're learning as little as someone who did 10 minutes of homework. Might as well not do it. And just to be clear, I'm not saying that's 60 minutes per class. That's 60 minutes total. That is across the board. So if you've got 6 classes, that's 10 minutes a class we should be looking at. How do we make that work? We've always found that homework works best when it's practice-based. How do we make practice-based homework work? You do it analog with worked examples. So that's where digital came in and said, we can do work examples, we can do homework really quickly, give you this adaptive stuff. Very cool, except kids don't do it. About 5 minutes into my worked examples online, I take a look at my email. I go ahead and go click over here, and then I get that attention problem. You give me work examples on a piece of paper, 10 minutes, off I go. You do that every night, you're going to be just fine. So here's where we start to bring the analog into the homework side too. Let's bring actual copies, physical copies of work that I'm doing. Writing with pen, note taking now. If you allow note taking in your classroom, 2 things. 1, pen and paper always outdoes typed notes. Always. Some people say they can use a stylus and do fine, sweet. But the only way to guarantee that a kid is taking the kind of notes we need for deep learning, you got to go pen and paper. Now that we've got pen and paper notes, now we can talk about how do we do revision. Revision comes back to all memory strategies. All memory is predicated on what we call recall. You want a deeper memory? Access it. Memories only get deeper when you access those memories. This is why I've had one wedding day, but I remember so much about it because we recall it all the time. My wife's like, do you remember what your brother did that day? Oh, do you remember what your father was wearing? Yeah. Every time you bring up a memory, it gets deeper. The worst thing for your memory is recognition. When you offload that memory, put it somewhere else and simply look at it and go, oh, I remember that. That's what cameras do, right? Rather than thinking about what did you look like at the wedding, you look at a picture and go, yeah, he was wearing yellow, cool, go away. That doesn't deepen your memory really all that much at all. So think about what tech does. Tech does everything it can to stop you from recalling. Look it up. Don't think about it, just look up the answer. Don't worry about the notes, just input them and we'll give you the summary of them. Everything tech does is basically going against the grain of what we need for deep memories when we talk about learning. So if we go to handwritten notes, now we can think about how do we translate those notes into handwritten note cards? How do we turn those into analog study strategies? All of these things, the first thing you'll notice, they're all analog, but they're hard. They require a little bit more time. They require a little bit more effort. But literally that time and that effort is where the learning is occurring. When we use machines, and that's how we use them, to smooth out the edges and make things as seamless and frictionless as possible, you don't learn anything because you've now skipped all the stages. Learning wasn't hearing the information. Learning was writing it down. Learning was translating it. Learning it was quizzing somebody else or telling your parents about it. The learning comes in all of those things that tech says, don't worry about though. We'll just give you the information and you should be good to go. And so that's where we say, we go back to the analog, things get a little stickier, things get a little rougher, but my goodness, learning gets a lot deeper.
You say in the book, and I love this summary of tech promised us, I'm paraphrasing, but like they promised us fast and easy, and what we actually need is slow and hard.
Yeah.
And
And
it's
you
been
think, think about it like a gym. Like no one would make that
exactly.
mistake in a gym, right? You invent a machine that lifts weights for you. No one's going to say, oh, I'm going to get strong. You're like, dang, that kind of takes away the whole point of why we're here. That is tech in schools. It takes away the point of why we're here, and I think this is an important point to make, especially when it comes to the AI discussion. Technology is there for production. They are production tools. They make the lives of experts easier. As an expert in stats, I could spend 2 hours doing the stats, or because I already know how to do them, I can offload it to a machine that's going to do it in 2 minutes. And the only reason I can do that is because I can vet it immediately. As soon as the computer spits back an answer, because of my deep knowledge, I can go, that's wrong. I did something wrong here, my bad. Or, nope, that's right, cool, off we go. They're production tools for experts. They are not learning tools for novices, for people who are hoping to someday become an expert. Offloading like we do as adults is the worst way to make sure a kid will develop the expertise that makes them successful as adults. They need to do the work, just like we did when we were their age. There will be, and that's what digital tech was built for us. It wasn't built for them. And trying to pretend that it's somehow a learning tool that helps people grow, that's never been part of the blueprint of any of these tools. I don't see, we want it to be true, but it just doesn't make a lick of sense, unfortunately.
And now with the AI tools, they're more accessible than ever. They're in our pockets, they're on our phones. One of the stats I wrote down from the book, I think I put your book down 3 times. One was to change from Toy Story 1 to Toy Story 2, which my 4-year-old was watching next to me. He was watching it on a screen rather than reading the book, but he can't read yet, Jared. So
Then you know what? You're fine. Go for
you're
it.
fine. That was a little bonding moment. He was watching Toy Story, I was reading your book. But I put your book down a second time and I ran out and I found my wife. And the thing that I shared with her was a statistic about getting rid of phones from school. And you have this beautiful stat in the book that is, if you compare schools with phones and without phones, a phone-free school has the same academic gains as 11 hours of study per week. So this is this beautiful, I always call this is a sweet spot in learning development, in leadership, in anything where a bit of a contrast from like hard and slow and fast and easy, where you make a hard choice, go phone free. That's a hard choice to make. The easy choice is to have your phone, whatever. You make a hard choice, but you get benefits from doing less. You spend
Yeah.
less time on your phone, less time doing the things that make us anxious and depressed, less time with things that are associated to obesity and all that. So you do less stuff, less like physical caloric output, and you get these benefits. 11 hours of additional academic gains from not having phones.
From
Tell me about that. Tell me about phones in school.
changing just
Why?
change the tool. The phones were always my favorite. And that's why I think this book is it's the time was when Haidt came out with The Anxious Generation. We'd been trying for years to get phones out of schools. Finally, something about that book broke the camel's back and people started to take it seriously. And I always said that is the easiest thing to do in schools is get phones out. The next level is now the rest of the tech because people will assume now that the phone is gone, everything else is going to be good. And you go, no, the phone was just a symptom of the larger problem. It was the easiest symptom to target. But when it comes to phones particularly, I always said, and I got a lot of pushback from South Australia on this for a long time. And lo and behold, they're the first ones
Yeah.
to push back now, was I would always say, why would a kid ever need a phone in school? Give me one valid reason and I will shut up and never talk about it again. For 12 years, I asked people that question, never got a valid reason. You hear a lot of people think, what if my kid needs to get a hold of me? Dude, there's a phone at the front of the school. What if I need to get a hold of my kid? There's a phone at the front of the school. What if my kid needs an app? If you really genuinely need tech, we have a camera, there's a camera, we have a Photoshop, all the tools that you would need. The only two big ones that always came up was what if it's an emergency? So in the US we have school shootings way more than we should. And people
Please
say,
write
what
a
if I
book
need to
about
get a
that
hold
at
of my
some point.
kid?
Just
Well,
from one Aussie to another, someone needs to write the book that they need to write The Anxious Generation on that. Please, for love of God, can someone write that book?
why is that happening? But we're working on a PSA right now that shows in an emergency situation, the absolute worst thing that can happen is everyone pull out a cell phone and start going. So as just as an example, in 2018
Interesting.
in Florida, there was a school shooting. So all the kids pull out their phones, start going. So the first thing that happens is the cell network now dies. So all the emergency, they cannot communicate with each other because the
Oh,
network is so clogged with in and out texting and going. Okay, but that's okay. The next thing is everyone is posting very different information. Where am I hiding? Where are the different gunmen? How many? And now the emergency responders have no clue what's going on or where anyone is. So they don't know where to start infiltrating the school because they've got all these conflicting reports about what's going on. But to make matters worse, as soon as the parents are getting texts from their kids, something is happening at my school, what do the parents do? Get in the car, drive to school. All of a sudden, there's a line of cars of parents trying to get into the parking lot. The ambulances couldn't get in. Kids
oh,
literally died because the ambulances were blocked by parents trying to rush the scene to help their kids. In an emergency situation, the best port of call is you let a few amount of people who are highly trained handle the situation. They tell everyone else what to do. And that's what emergency responders like. Train teachers, and that's the only thing we need to hear when something like this happens. So the idea that it somehow makes kids safer. No, we have data showing that having cell phones in an emergency makes kids less safe than if you would have just let the situation play out the way it always has been. Let the adults run the show and we're going to sort this thing out. So it makes you feel safer, but it actually makes things a lot less safe. And the last one was this was about 6 years ago. Somebody said, my kid has a defibrillator and his cell phone will jolt his heart if his heart stops. So he needs a cell phone. To which I respond, absolutely, man. Let that kid have a cell phone. I don't want him dying. Go for it. But there was a doctor in the room who then raised his hand and said, I'm going to call BS on that because there's not a doctor in the world who would use a cell phone as a medical device for something that important. Because a cell phone, that means you're putting your kid's life in a device that they may have played video games on all morning. And now that the battery's dead, they're going to die because it can't jolt their heart. So the doctor said, no, we would never use a cell phone as a medical device. So even the medical argument makes no sense. There's no conceivable reason why a kid would need a phone at school at any time. And my favorite stat, I've known a lot of schools that have tried like cell phone policies, right? Okay, you can use them between class, but you can't use them in class, or you use them before and after school. Yeah, keep them in your locker, but I don't want to see them. Almost invariably, those schools go back to nothingness. right? They'll try their policy, it really won't work. Kids won't comply. A lot of teachers won't comply. And about 2, 3 years later, they're just back to let cell phones. I don't know of a single school in the world that has banned cell phones, hard bell to bell ban, that has ever gone back to using them. As soon as schools ban them to a school, they're all like, there's my kids again. Hey, they're playing at recess. This is what we've been looking for. Maybe they exist, and I'm totally happy for someone to point it out to me, but I have yet to come across a single school that's banned and gone, that didn't work. Everyone has said, this is so much better for learning, for development, for health, for happiness, for socialization across the board. So the cell phone thing never really gelled with me.
The digital delusion. And when that delusion is lifted, when people see through it, I think you nailed it so beautifully. There's my kids again.
There it is. When you see your kids playing on a playground at recess instead of looking at phones, you're like, oh, that's why I became a teacher. That's why I like having kids again. It just brings it all back.
I heard once, I forget the attribution, I really need to get this, but every author is a slave to the byline of their book, not the title, but whatever that next bit.
Subtitle.
Subtitle, like they're all a slave to that. Mine was like 11 lessons in leadership in 5 minutes or less. And now people are like, can you do it in 5 minutes? I love the second part of it. We've talked about how it harms your kids, how to help them thrive again. And we hear the word thrive all the time. I just love what thrive means. And it's like taking advantage of every opportunity. And have you ever seen that movie Don't Look Up?
Yeah.
Leo and
Bingo,
and
yes.
all stuff. And the whole thing is like, don't look at what's actually happening. Just look down here. Just keep looking down. It's like that metaphor came to me in the part of your book where you talk about thriving, where it's, if you don't pour your eyes and your attention and your effort into this thing, that the feedback loop then creates all the anxiety and the depression and the stress and the concern and the false relationships and the false feeling of meaning and all the falseness. It's like when you strip away all the falseness, it's like you can thrive, and thriving, like taking advantage of all the great opportunities, not just, I would say, in the classroom and for our university audience, not just in the classroom, but everything else, the social relationships, the opportunities to help one another, the opportunities to see someone who's actually sitting alone, who doesn't normally sit alone. And when they're alone on their phone, you think they're watching something, but maybe they're sitting alone on their phone because they've had a bad day. They have no one to talk to. And then those opportunities for what we care about in leadership is, that's your leadership moment. That's your moment where you walk over to that kid and say, are you okay? And then they say that they're not. And then you have a conversation. And it's like that bonding, that oxytocin. They're probably on their video, true connection. I don't want to interrupt them. They're watching what they're watching, or they've got their headphones in. They probably don't want me to talk to them. Yeah. But if those things go away, then all of a sudden kids are sitting there and they actually have to feel the emotion.
Over half of kids report using their cell phone at school specifically to avoid having to interact with other human beings. It's called phubbing.
Phubbing, yes.
Snub you in lieu of my phone. But the reason for that is because they're wildly uncomfortable. They were raised in a world where they never had to interact with people, and so it's hard for them to do it. And the argument is, how will they ever learn it if they never have to? I was at, this is scary, sorry, McDonald's. I think they have them there. If you go to a McDonald's, you really can't order anything anymore because they got a screen where you do all the ordering for you. I hate it. I'm like, dude, what? Turn McDonald's into a phone? Get out of here. But anyway, so I was at a McDonald's the other day getting a coffee, and all the screens were down, so you had to go up and order. Literally a kid, it must have been 13, 14, definitely a teenager, asked me if I could order for him because he didn't know how to order. And that's where I'm realizing, man, we've just never trained them in anything. They're phubbing each other, not because they need me time. They're phubbing each other because they have no clue how to interact with one another. And how are they ever going to figure that out if we don't get them off of screens? It's every time your kid acts up in a restaurant, you throw a phone in front of them. Now, when they're a teenager and they have a phone in front of them at a restaurant, you're like, get off the phone. Mate, you literally trained them to do that. They have no clue how else to act in this situation because you didn't feel like being in the uncomfortable position as an adult of teaching them, if you cry, we're getting up and leaving. If you throw your food on the floor, that's it, we're out of here. Can you go sit by mommy? It's hard. It's difficult to raise kids, and to pretend that we can just ignore that whole process by using this easy offloading tool that's going to hold their attention, that's the kind of thing we're snubbing for them. Now they become adults and they don't want to interact with each other, not because they're cool and they're highly independent, but because they have no clue what else to do. So they just go to the phone, the only thing they've ever really known. Absolutely breaks my heart.
Mate, mine too. And with both of us with young kids, I think I feel incredibly privileged. Like, obviously, to talk to you is amazing. The work you do is incredibly important. But I just feel like I get like emotional when I think about it. I feel so privileged to be a parent right now because for 20 bucks on Amazon, you can download a book and get the world's best research. And if you can read it and understand it, we're going to raise our kids so different based on what we know. And it's
Yeah.
like you can see the disaster out there and you go, obviously, we're not going to do that. We know smoking kills them. Obviously, we're not going to give cigarettes to our kids or have them ourselves. Like, obviously. But that gap in that generation, like 90s to the 2020s ish, where we and I don't know, maybe the next sort of mid generation of kids were like this social experiment in, let's just see, as Tristan Harris talks about, and I really like this, he talks about it
Yeah.
as that the social media was the first example of misaligned AI, and let's just see what happens. And it's like,
Yeah.
what in anxious generation is a misaligned AI within an AI algorithm, within a social media algorithm? And it's like, we see what happens when the AI does what the AI wants for the business model of the company.
Yeah.
We now can see through that. And I feel really privileged. But I'm guessing this is probably a bit of your call as well. Is like I tell my friends about this and I tell other parents about this, and they've just bought their kid the new thing and they're picking a school for their kid because of the technology program. And I'm like, it's like, I don't know how to raise enough noise. So
It's so
help me with that.
counterintuitive. I think you've got fear of missing out. There are going to be a
Yes.
lot of families who go to school specifically for the tech because they think that's necessary. When the data is the complete opposite, the kids who do not use tech are more technologically savvy and they show better digital literacy than kids who were trained and grew up on tech. This is why, believe it or not, Gen Z, who grew up with tech, are equivalent on literacy to Gen X, who didn't have tech till they were in their 40s. How is it possible that they could be the same? Because Gen X learned how to live life. And now when you bring in a tool, they can adapt for the tool. You don't need digital literacy, you need life literacy. And now what is the tool but a microcosm of that larger life? But when you train kids on a tool, the microcosm is all there is. They cannot extend that out to the wider world around them. And so you get these really stunted kids where if you train me how to be nice on TikTok, I'll be nice on TikTok, but I won't be nice on Facebook because you didn't train me how to do that. And I don't know how to be nice on YouTube because you didn't train. Now I got to train you in every little thing, where if we would have stepped back and just said, what does it mean to be a good human being? Let's live in this playground together and figure out what happens when you get made fun of. Figure out what happens when you make fun of somebody else. Figure out what happens when someone punches somebody, when you have a good day, when you have a bad day. Learn to live in life. And tech is the easiest thing in the world. Tech doesn't make life harder. AI, stupidest thing in the world. People are saying we got to train kids on AI. A box where you type a question, I got to train kids on that. Why don't we train kids how to think? And then they'll ask questions. No one trained me how to use AI. I use it better than 90% of the world. Why? Because I know how to think. This is where we've got to somehow reignite this belief that human beings without tech are still valid, viable, deeply meaningful things, and that that meaning can carry over into tech without us ever needing to train on that tech. And so I'd say the data for all those people who say the next level is, how will my kid ever get a job? Gen Z is the least job ready generation ever, except for Gen A, Gen Alpha. A survey just came out a couple months ago where I think they interviewed 800 hiring managers around the US. 80% of them said they would never hire a Gen Zer because they're not ready for work. How are they possibly not ready for work when we literally spent hours of every week of their schooling training them on these tools so that they would be world ready and work ready? Because they were never life ready. So they come in, they know how to code, great. They don't know how to pour a coffee or talk to the person at the cubicle next to them or work on anything else. Who cares if they know how to code? No one needs this stuff. Jobs can train you on their tools. If I want to go work for Google, trust me, a 1 month training at Google where they tell me, here's what I need you to do, I'll be fine. What we can't train older people in is much harder is how do you live life? That comes in K through 12. That comes from interacting with people. That comes from, and that's where now you would extend. So take it back from tech. Go back to Abigail Schreier or even Haidt in his first book, The Coddling of the American Mind. We're basically
Such a good
saying
book.
we if you get rid of all bullying, and I'm not advocating for bullying, you get rid of all resilience. If you get rid of all drugs, you get rid of all resilience. If you clean house and make everything as safe and sterile as is humanly possible, you will not raise life-ready kids. You will raise kids who are incredibly weak, incredibly fragile, and do not have a real identity beyond help me. Something is going wrong. I need somebody to help me with this. I don't want to make fun of kids. I don't want to be made fun of, but I was and I did. And that stuff makes me who I am. I don't want to be sick, but I've had some great illnesses in my life, and those things made me who I am now. That's this belief that we got to let kids live with each other again, cut their teeth with each other again. Yes, bullying will return. And as adults, we're going to stop it and we're going to punish kids, but they're going to do it. Yes, kids are going to sneak out behind the shaggin' wagon, the snack shack, and smoke a cigarette. Yeah, it's going to happen. And I'm going to bust you. Doesn't mean I let you get away with it. You're going to get in trouble. There's consequences. But these are the things where when we return to a analog life, we will raise more literate human beings. And when you're literate in life, tech is easy, man. There's nothing hard about coding. You can learn that in 10 minutes if you know how to think and learn.
I really hope the follow-up book to The Digital Delusion, when it catches on, is The Return to the Analog Life. I think that's a really nice... I know nothing about that expertise, but I would just say I would buy that book as a part 2 personally. But I think that's maybe the... I know you've got some solutions there. And I love that in the book you provide like the letters to the school and the templates and all the really actionable stuff that can be done. I think one of the things that's going to be really nice in 12 to 24 months are those longitudinal case studies where schools come out of the woodwork and they go, we've come out of the digital delusion. We're we're educating our parents in our local communities where our son's about to start school. Like, first thing I'm going to do is walk into that school with a stack of this book and be like, how many educators do you have here? 67? Fantastic. Here's 67 copies. Like, how do we get, and this is my last question for you, how do we get a copy in the hand of every principal in every country? How do we get a copy in the hands of the year coordinators? How do we get just copies of the book, recordings of you speaking? How do we hit critical mass so that enough educators can challenge this thinking? Because it's going to resonate with what they see. They're going to go, of course. Like, how do you get that Gladwell tipping point of enough people to care about this so it becomes cool to care for our kids and it becomes cool to get the tech that's stopping that out of the classroom?
Dang it. I have no idea. I've got ideas, but the only thing I can think is it's going to be grassroots. I think we've got 2 really good things going for us. One is the cell phone stuff. The fact that governments are already starting to pay attention and say, wait, we can do this stuff? Yes, you can do it. Yes, you can block social media. We're allowed to make rules. It's fine. And I think that's going to open the door.
What a concept.
I know, right? That's opening the door, at least in the US right now, for I think 6 states in the next couple months are going to put forward opt-out bills, which say, okay, parents, if you do not want tech for your child, you have the legal right to opt out of all non-essential tech. So if they have to take a test like the SATs on the screen, fine. But everything else, they got to offer analog. I think that'll be a huge breakthrough moment where even if 10% of parents say, cool, I'm opting my kid out of tech, all of those schools now have to offer both analog and digital versions. And every teacher who has to do both, they're going to only select one. They're going to see how much work they put into the analog, and they're going to say, screw the digital. This is more reflective of me, of what I care about, of what I want. The kids using it are doing better. And I think that's going to be a big move. So the opt-out becomes huge. And I also think the other thing we have going for us is teachers. Teachers do not have a voice because their job is on the line. If they notice something, very rarely will they say it. Just because, cool, I need to put food on the table. In my experience, and I've been doing this for a long time, I would argue about 70% of teachers are completely done with tech. They hate it. But they work in schools where the principal says, we need to be, oh, AI's here, you got to be AI. Oh, the VR, we got to use VR, everyone. They do it begrudgingly because it's what their job requires. But I think if you got enough parents pushing back and enough people on that bandwagon, you would see a huge surge of teachers saying, we've been saying this for decades. Any teacher that's been in a classroom for longer than 20 years will tell you kids are worse today than 20 years ago. And it's not because we're teaching them worse, it's because of these tools. And I think you'd have a huge swell of teachers on board.
Do you know what
whether or not the leaders pay attention, that becomes the issue.
Can I throw an idea at you? I just had an idea. I don't know if this is nonsense or not. You know what could be really interesting? Teachers' unions. So teachers are reading
Yeah.
articles every single day that their jobs are going to go away, they're going to be replaced with technology. So there's a fear, there's a pain there. Teachers' unions represent the teaching degree. We also know that, at least in Australia, within the first 5 years of teaching, there's incredible dropout. And we
Yeah.
have the Teach for America, Teach for Australia here. We have these programs and to get teachers into schools, but the churn and the burn rate is so high, it's so stressful. And then they're dealing with more behavioral issues because the tech is making the kids less happy and they have less relationships, there's less self-policing. What
Yeah.
if this teachers' unions push this up and said, we actually think there's an argument on for the well-being of our staff, all the
Yeah.
teachers we represent, that could that be some really interesting upward pressure?
Yeah,
Maybe.
because no, that's not a bad idea at all because they've got a voice of power that most
Yes.
teachers don't, but the union carries that, and if they speak, people will have to listen. That's not a bad idea at all. And I think
Bargaining.
that's
Yeah.
because you're spot on because they'll say we're here for the teachers, not for the students. But you see, the teachers want this, and one of the first things you see when you get rid of tech is behavioral issues go down significantly. Because most teachers spend all their time just saying, put it away, stay on task, stay focused.
Yeah.
Imagine not having to say that anymore. You'd still have to say stay focused, but it's because of a book, and you don't
And
have to worry about what else they're looking at.
and behavioral issues turn into, in classrooms at the extreme, verbal and physical violence against the teachers. So if we
Yeah,
have a mechanism, if we have a mechanism that we have all the data that proves here's an intervention, and if it was Adam Alter's drunk tank pink stuff, it's if we knew that just painting classrooms pink would reduce behavioral issues in the classroom, which reduces violence to teachers, I think the teachers' unions would say, tell me a really good reason why every classroom isn't painted pink if we know 11% less teachers will be assaulted. I think you've got a
yeah,
really valid argument of if we know that this is a way to keep our staff safe and we're looking after their well-being and we know that they churn and burn,
that's
like
pretty dang huge.
what if that got on their agenda? What if, and that probably means like the teachers' unions out there. If anyone's listening here who is like teachers and principals, we're in with some of the principals associations around different parts of Australia.
Yeah.
You go and if you're speaking, your message hits them. This
Who
is for
runs?
all the listeners of the podcast. I'm aware we're on a podcast right now, and this is much more like two guys like shooting strategy. But this is so important, and it's like this is a moment in history where you're not Copernicus on the deathbed saying, "Hey, I think the sun's kind of the middle of the thing." You're Galileo who's going out there and saying to the public, "I'm risking my career, like I'm not risking my career, but I'm putting myself up for criticism here, up against massive $100 billion industries."
Yeah.
And we know that this stuff's right.
But it's
How do we?
that's and you're right. I think we're lucky. It's not a theory. It's not an
Yes.
idea. I was talking. There was somebody was asking me the other day, and I said this isn't theoretically bad for all these things. It's not possibly. It is demonstrably like it is. There's no question anymore. The
It's
data is in.
ambulances in gridlock bad.
And we have the explanation. Everyone says, and that was one of the big things. I had one of my academic buddies read the book, and he said, "A lot of your data is correlative." And I said, "Yeah, data in social sciences is always correlation. We're not medicine. We're not allowed to go there and actually force diseases.
Yeah.
The only way you can get past correlation in social sciences is with mechanism. If I can explain to you why the data looks exactly like it does, now we've gone and we can say, cool, that's as close to causation as we're ever going to get." We have that. It's not, there's no debate anymore as to why tech is harming. Why are digital books worse than hard copy? We know. Why is typing worse than handwriting? We know. Why is looking at a screen versus being live with the same exact person? Put a kid in a class, film that class, and ask another kid to watch it simultaneously on a screen. The kid watching the screen will learn less. We know why. We have the mechanisms and the data. And that's why I think I'm totally happy to go toe to toe with the Googles and stuff of the world. I don't think they'll debate me because I'm not wrong. There's absolutely nothing you can push back against that says my mechanisms or my data are incorrect. All you can do is say, we wish it were otherwise. Sweet. So do I, mate. But it ain't. And so we got to deal with the world we got. And if we can, and like you're saying, if we can get more people to recognize the battle's over, the war's done, we just need to clean up now. We need to get this right. And no one will push back against you. No one's going to come out with a magical paper that says, you've all been wrong, because it hasn't happened since 1962. So how do we get people to just realize, yeah, we're done. It's time for the next evolution of education, which in this case might be I hate to say the term, return to form. Let's go back. Let's go back to what we were doing 2 decades ago before we started this whole mass
Yeah.
journey down the wrong path.
And it's a chance to be on the right side of history here. It's we were hoodwinked, we were sold a bill
Yeah,
of goods. This is a chance to be on the right side of history. And if you're going to look back on what happened from mid 2020s to the mid 2030s, this decade, yeah, this was the decade that we reversed the trend. Because those scores are going
enough.
down, but like we also can make those scores go up. I want to be respectful of
Yeah,
your time and let you go, but like we make those scores go up, and all of a sudden your school's the school, you're the principal, you're the head teacher that was brave enough to do the thing, and you not mediate it, you reverse the trend. That's something that a career's built off. That's what awards are won
against
for.
odds. Dude,
Against odds.
I always this is I've done a lot of work and I love all my work and I think my research, I love my research. This is the first time where I think I've done something that I would call important because I think this is it. We have a chance to make an actual difference, not just in how people teach or how in the structure of education for our children writ large. And that's what I love. I think you're right with the pushback, especially in the US against AI recently. So Trump was like, let's make AI carte blanche, do whatever you want. And even the most hardcore right wing pundits were like, no, that's a bad idea. I think we're at a point where people are ready to push back against this whole tech thing. And if we do it right, awesome. I think we have a chance to make an actual difference. And how rare is that to actually know that this could make my kid's life better? We have that opportunity. All we got to do is seize that dang opportunity. So that's why I wrote the book. That's my attempt to try and do the right thing here.
The Digital Delusion, How Classroom Technology Harms Our Kids' Learning and How to Help Them Thrive Again. Live now, wherever you get books. If you know a principal, buy them a copy. If you know a teacher, buy them a copy. If you know a parent, buy them a copy. But don't do any of that if you don't also buy yourself a copy, because I promise that copy you read, you won't be able to put down. That copy you read will change the way you think about technology. And that copy you read will give you hope that the problems that you see in society are real, but they can be reversed. And that
Yeah,
I reckon we ought to be the generation of leaders who do it.
I love it. I love that. Let's do it.
Jared, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
No, thank you, Josh. That was awesome. Thank you for chatting.